Did Jesus Christ really exist? Or is he just a mythical figure created by Christians? Hello and welcome to our new video series, The Historical Jesus, a video series where we investigate some of the most challenging, controversial, and fascinating questions ever asked about Jesus Christ. So, did Jesus actually exist in history? This question has been debated for a long time. But here's something surprising. The vast majority of classical historians and scholars today, including non-Christians, agree that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical person. So what's the evidence? Let's explore it in this video. To be honest, when people ask, did Jesus exist? What they often mean is there any evidence outside the Bible? Many people dismiss the New Testament, saying it's biased because it was written by Christian believers. But here's the problem with the argument. Being biased does not automatically make something false. All ancient historians wrote with a particular perspective and purpose, yet their works are still considered valuable historical sources. In fact, strong conviction can sometimes motivate greater care in recording events accurately. So in the end, what matters is whether their claims can be tested and supported. Secondly, the New Testament writers were not originally Christians. They were Jews who adopted a radically new belief system. Now, this raises an important question. Why would they risk persecution and death for something they knew to be false? Their transformation suggests that they were convinced by powerful evidence. Additionally, the Gospels were written relatively early, within 25 to 40 years of Jesus' death. That too, while eyewitnesses were still alive. For example, Luke explicitly states his intention to write an orderly and accurate account. Luke chapter 1 verse 3. Now, this early circulation would have made fabrication very difficult. So instead of dismissing the Bible, we should examine it alongside other historical sources. Alright, let's start with the non-Christian Roman historians. First, Tacitus, one of Rome's greatest historians. Writing around 116 AD, in his work Annals 1544, Tacitus records that Christ was executed under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Now that matches exactly what the Gospels say about Jesus. The Gospels say that Jesus was a real person, he was crucified, and that the event occurred under Roman authority. And remember, Tacitus hated Christians. He had no reason to support their claims. This certainly strengthens the credibility of his testimony. Next, Pliny the Younger. He was a Roman governor. Now, in a letter to Emperor Trajan around 112 AD, Pliny describes Christians worshipping Christ as to a god and committing to moral living. Now, this shows early Christians believed Jesus was divine and that they followed his ethical teachings. Now, this would not be possible if Jesus wasn't a real historical person. Then there's Suetonius, another Roman historian, who mentions disturbances among Jews at the instigation of Christ. And he also refers to the persecution of Christians under Nero. Now, this reflects the early spread and impact of Jesus' followers. All of these Roman sources confirm one thing, that Jesus wasn't a myth. He had a real impact on history. Let's now look at ancient Greek sources. Firstly, Lucian of Samosata, a 2nd century Greek writer who mocked Christians for worshipping a crucified man who introduced new teachings. Now, despite his ridicule, Lucian confirms that Jesus was crucified, that his followers worshipped him, and that his teachings influenced their way of life. A clear indication that Jesus was a historical person. Then there's another Greek historian named Celsus, who was a strong opponent of Christianity, writing in the 2nd century. He accused Jesus of performing miracles through magic. In addition to providing evidence for the historical Jesus, ironically, this suggests that even opponents acknowledged his reputation for extraordinary acts, because instead of denying the miracles, he tries to explain them away. Now, then there are also other references from writers like Thales and Phlegon, who attempted to explain the darkness and earthquakes reported at Jesus' crucifixion. Now, even if they disagreed with the cause, they acknowledged something unusual happened during the crucifixion of Jesus, which clearly points to the historicity of Jesus. Now, the next line of evidence. What about Jewish historians? Josephus, a 1st century Jewish historian, provides 2 important references in his work, Antiquities of the Jews. First, a clear mention of James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ. Now, this is important because it is a passing reference. It only makes sense if Jesus was already known as a real person. Second, a longer passage, likely altered maybe slightly by later Christians, but still widely believed to contain authentic material about Jesus as a wise man who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. Now, these references are significant because Josephus was not a Christian. Then we also have the Babylonian Talmud, which speaks of Yeshu being executed on the eve of Passover for leading people astray. Now, although these sources are hostile, it confirms that Jesus existed, that he was executed, and that he had a reputation for performing unusual deeds. Now, let's look at evidence from early Christian writings. Beyond the Bible, early Christian leaders also wrote about Jesus, which further confirmed belief in the historical Jesus. Firstly, Clement of Rome, writing in the late 1st century, refers to Jesus' teachings and death. Secondly, Ignatius of Antioch, writing early 2nd century, emphasizes that Jesus truly lived and suffered. Justin Martyr from the 2nd century appeals to Roman records to support Jesus' crucifixion. Now, these writers were either taught by eyewitnesses or lived very, very close to the events. Now, these sources also show that belief in Jesus' life and resurrection was firmly established very, very early. Their consistency definitely strengthens the historical case. Now, when we bring all these sources together, Roman, Greek, Jewish, and Christian, sometimes they are friendly, sometimes neutral, sometimes hostile. They all agree on several key facts. That Jesus lived in 1st century Judea, he was a teacher and a leader, he was crucified under Pontius Pilate during Tiberius' reign, his followers believed he performed miracles, they worshipped him as God, and they were willing to even die for that belief. Now, that's a remarkable level of agreement across very, very different sources. So, did Jesus really exist? The evidence says yes. In fact, no serious historian today argues that Jesus was a myth. Even his enemies acknowledged his existence. Now, when we combine the early and detailed New Testament records, independent references from Roman and Jewish historians, and testimony from early Christian writers, a consistent picture emerges. Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure. So the real question isn't whether Jesus existed. The real question is, who was he? Was he just a teacher or a prophet? or something more? That's a question history points toward, but each of us has to answer. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. God bless you.